This is your Marijuana Cultivation Cannabis Podcast. I'm your host, Steven Glansberg, broadcasting from the illustrious James A. Garfield Studios. We're here to help you grow top-shelf cannabis, and today's episode is all about the critical final stages of your grow. Knowing when to harvest, how to properly harvest, and the essential steps of drying and curing your cannabis. These are the steps where all your hard work really pays off. So let's get it right. Let's dive deep into the details to make sure you get it right. Before we jump in, just a quick reminder to email your questions, feedback, tell me my mess ups, contact mcc@gmail.com. That's M as in Mary, C as in cannabis, C as in cannabis again, LOL. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at mccpod for daily updates and sneak peeks of upcoming shows, as well as requests for listener questions that will have to do with whatever subject I'm covering that day. Alright, I think that does it. After we get this intro finished up, let's get into it. So when the heck do we know to harvest? How do we know when to harvest? This is one of the most crucial decisions you will make during your grow. Harvesting too early or too late can significantly impact the potency, flavor, and yield of your crop. We've all been there. Eager to get to that finish line, and we harvest too early. But patience truly is a virtue when it comes to harvesting cannabis. Let's start with the basics. One of the primary indicators of when to harvest is the appearance of the trichomes. I would argue that this is the only indicator that I rely on. Obviously, your plant needs to look the part as well, but if it doesn't, we got other issues. So, if we're deciding when to harvest or not, if that's our question, then the trichomes are essentially the way to go. Trichomes are those tiny crystal-like structures that cover the buds, and they're responsible for producing all the fun stuff, the cannabinoids and terpenes that give cannabis its potency and flavor. These trichomes start out clear, but become milky or cloudy, and then even turn to amber as the plant matures. You're going to need some magnification to see these trichomes properly. A jeweler's loupe, which offers around 30 times magnification, is a popular choice. But if you want a clearer view, consider using a digital microscope that connects to your phone or computer. This will give you a much closer look at those trikes, and it'll make it easier to decide when to chop. Now, get a wireless, I'll say it again, wireless microscope. If you get one with the cord that connects the microphone to your phone, it's not going to work. I don't know why, it just doesn't. They look the same. You'd think just transferring the data from the phone via a cord wouldn't make a difference, but it's something about the weight of the cord or what it is. But no one can seem to have luck with those corded ones. Just make sure to get the wireless one, and they're about the same price. Okay. Now, once we've identified the trichomes and have a proper tool to look at them, here are the characteristics that we want to see. If the trichomes are still clear, it means that your plant isn't quite ready yet. And if you harvest at this stage, it's going to result in buds with less potency. No good. Particularly in terms of THC content. But as those trichomes develop further and turn milky or cloudy, the THC is reaching its peak levels. And this is the sweet spot for those looking for a more cerebral, uplifting high. On the other hand, when the trichomes turn amber, the THC starts converting into CBN, which has a more of a sedative effect. Now, another way to achieve that higher CBN content is longer cure. As your cures get into that, year or longer length, you're gonna get that sleep medicine going. It's not gonna be much of a high, but it's gonna be more of a sleep medicine, which is cool in and of itself because many of us use cannabis for other things that have nothing to do with getting high. Most growers will aim to have about 70% at least of the trichomes being cloudy, with the remaining 30 being a mix of clear and amber. This balance tends to provide a well-rounded effect, strong and potent, but not too couch-locky. Now, I did say that the trichomes were the biggest thing that I'm looking for, but they're not the only thing that you should be monitoring. Also, just keep an eye on those pistils, and it's easier to do this than keeping an eye on the trichomes. Those are those hair-like structures that protrude from the buds. They can also tell a little bit of a story. Early in the flowering stage, these pistils are white and stand straight out, but as the plant matures, they darken and curl inward. So like when 70 to 90% of the pistils have darkened and curled, it's another good indicator that your plants are ready for harvest. I do know a local grow shop owner who strictly goes off of this method and nothing to do with the trichomes. So, like I say, the vast majority of people are looking at those trichomes, but the pistils are an interesting factor as well, for sure. And with everything marijuana growing related, there's a little bit of an art to this process. Some of you are going to prefer to stagger your harvests, taking buds from the top of the plant first, where they receive the most light and mature fastest, and then you leave the bottom ones to let them continue developing for another week or two. I have heard this can maximize your yield big time. It isn't something that I've tried yet, but I would like to. And then lastly, something that we're doing all the time, but pay attention to the overall health of your plant. The leaves are going to start yellowing as the plant focuses all its energy on the buds. And if your plant is still dark green and lush, it might need more time. So your leaves are going to kind of look like they're dying as you get close to harvest. But this is actually a healthy, normal part of the process that we do get excited to see. It's the indicator that the buds are in maximum development and the fan leaves are no longer needed, aka we're getting damn near ready to harvest. Okay? So use jewelers, hate that word, loupe or a digital microscope to check the trichomes. And look for those cloudy trichomes with some amber mixed in. And check for the pistils that are 70 to 90% darkening. Combine these visual cues with your overall knowledge of the strain's flowering time, and you'll be set to harvest at the perfect moment. All right, let's move on to the actual harvesting process. So, we've decided it's time to harvest. Awesome. This is a great milestone in our process. But fortunately, we are not done yet. We got to do this right. We got to use proper techniques, because this is the only way that we can preserve the quality of our cannabis and our terpenes. You are going to see the difference if you handle your plants from harvest to smoke very delicately. You're going to be like, holy cow, there's so much more on this bud than I would see at a dispensary, because at a dispensary that thing's been knocked around to the moon and back, and by the time it gets to you, it's a different looking thing than when you start to see your end product here with your home grow, and then you'll be hooked. Tools you will need. You'll need a good pair of sharp scissors or pruning shears. I know I've talked about AC Infinity a lot. I hate their scissors. I hate them. They're poor quality in my opinion, and I got a pair like a year ago, so unless they've upgraded them, I hate them. The brand that I now go with is Vivo Sun. I don't have a lot of Vivo Sun stuff, but for some reason, their 6.5-inch gardening scissors are just the best. And you can get a 3-pack for like $12 on Amazon. I'm looking at it right now. What is it? Yeah, $11.99. Oh, and you can apply a coupon for an extra $1 off. So go with that one. I also tend to have like a bigger, more heavy duty garden one for cutting those stalks off, right out of your soil or right out of your cocoa, because these little scissors ain't going to really cut it for those. And then keep some rubbing alcohol on hand to clean those scissors and your hands. It's just going to get caked in resin, and that rubbing alcohol is going to be your best bet for getting it off. Soap and water don't work well. It's really that rubbing alcohol. So what I do is I get that 3-pack of scissors. I have, I use 1, use 2. They're caked in resin. I dump them in a cup of rubbing alcohol, use the third clean one, and by the time the third one is in need of cleaning, the 2 in the rubbing alcohol will be ready to go. And the rubbing alcohol also is going to help us avoid spreading those pathogens from, cutting, the different parts of the plant open and then going to another plant and then, crap on our hands. So it's a good idea to run some of that through your hands as well, as you are trimming in trim jail, if you will. So when it comes to the actual cutting, there are 2 main methods. I do one of these exclusively, and I've had great success, but I haven't done the other method enough to give like an A/B comparison. So I'll give my little anecdotes where I can on the one method, and on the other one, we're just going to pass along the latest thinking in the cannabis community on it. All right. So there's 2 methods, like I said. Let's start with the whole plant method, and this is the one that I do. This method involves cutting the entire plant at the base, right near the soil, and hanging it upside down in your drying area. So one of the benefits of this method is that the plant's larger leaves will help slow down the drying process, which can be beneficial if you're in a drier climate. Slower drying usually leads to a smoother smoke, as it allows the chlorophyll in the plant to break down more completely. All right. So my thinking was, I'm going to include all the plant material when I hang it up, because from everything I can see, and this is going back to when I first started growing, from everything I can see, I'm getting all these people talking about a hay smell. And the hay smell was coming from those short dry periods where they dried it out too quickly. So in my head, I was like, all right, obviously I'm just going to pick the option that allows for makes it easier to prolong the drying process by having more plant material. But remember now, this is going to take up a whole lot of space, and it can be a little bit smellier, and it can be harder to manage your drying environment because, again, it's going to be pumping out all that moisture. So make sure you have a room with good air circulation and a way to hang plants so they're not touching each other. The key is to give them enough space so that air can circulate around the plant and keep those lights off. What I do at my house is my dry room is the little Harry Potter cupboard under the stairs. It stays at the right RH usually, but if not, it's a little bit lower, and I can just throw a electronically monitored humidifier in there that'll just keep it at a certain humidity level. And then I just throw a couple of clip fans in there, and then one air purifier just to keep the wife happy and not have a bunch of weed smell going through the house, because that is a very stinky time in your process, probably the stinkiest. While you're trimming it, that's going to be the stinkiest. Your whole neighborhood might just smell, even if you're in your basement. But after that, your drying process is going to be your stinkiest. So that's why I put at least one air purifier under there in that same closet, with the air going, the humidifier going if needed, and the lights off and the door shut. And I do the whole plant method, and I can easily get, a 7 to 10 to 14 day dry. Moving over to the branch by branch method. My best buddy does this, and he grows probably better flowers than me. So here we go. So what you're going to do with the branch by branch method is you're just going to be cutting off individual branches rather than the whole stalk. And then you hang each individual branch. It's helpful in smaller spaces for sure. It's going to help your trim down the road because you're removing more of those larger fan leaves right away. And if speeding up the drying process is something that you want to achieve, this is the way to go. I know some go too long depending on the environment. And then also, when I do my method, I'm risking mold. Whereas this branch by branch method with less plant material obviously is going to be a less healthy environment for mold. So you're less likely to get it. And keep in mind that when you're cutting these branches, still try to keep as much of the stem as possible. So it'll be easier to hang it, and it'll provide more support as the buds dry. A lot of people use clothes hangers or drying racks, or even stringing lines. That's what I do. I just have big ass thing of twine in my dry closet, and then I just hang it from rafter to rafter in that unfinished closet that's underneath the stairs. And I can fit a ton in there, and it works great. I've touched on this a little bit, but obviously we do want to keep an eye on that moisture level in your drying room. We're going to want that, 60-60 old school rule is great. If you're ending up having to have a little hotter room, at least I have been able to up my RH a little bit to compensate for that and get to a VPD more along the lines of that 60-60. A lot of times I don't want to get my whole house super cold just for my dry room. So if it's 66 degrees in there instead of 60, I'll do some math. Maybe it'll come out to, okay, well, if you're going to be at 60-60, let's bump up your RH from 60 to 64. That little extra RH will keep the plants in there from drying out too quickly, and drying out too quickly cause the dreaded hay smell that you hear about all the time. Okay? And if you have questions about that and the math that I do to get my RH that I want, let me know. And just another plug for being gentle with your plants during this time. You'll get it after your first time around, but for your first time, it's super easy. You'll find it super easy to knock those trikes off of your plants as you're handling them. And then if you don't do that and you get all the way to your final product without knocking it around too much, you're going to be like, wow, on my first grow ever, I've already grown something better than I've ever gotten from a dispensary. Like that happens usually if your harvest goes well and you handle your stuff well. So it's sweet. Just be gentle. All right. Again, we are going to want to keep that room dark. And, like I said, I really like to get precise with it. I like to match the VPD that 60-60 equals. If my temp gets a little high, I've always had really good success doing it this way. The latest school of thought, though, if you look online, they're saying temperature between 60 and 70 is fine, and an RH of between 50 and 60 is fine. Man, if I find I go any lower than 60 on the RH, my stuff dries out too quickly. It probably is my environment, my climate, but so like I say, for me, I figure out what the VPD is for a 60-60. I then do a little algebra to find out, okay, well, I don't have 60 Fahrenheit in here, I have 66 or whatever it is. Do the math and figure out what my RH needs to be to get that same VPD. And I know VPD isn't end all be all, but in this scenario where the range is really small, it's under that 10 degrees, under that 10 degree range, while still matching that VPD, I think we're okay. And like I said, this is how I've always done it, and it's always worked. The only time that I get lower than 66 Fahrenheit in my house is in where this particular Harry Potter closet is, or cupboard, or whatever they called it, is in like the hottest time of the summer when we have the AC blasting. Other than that, it's 66 degrees, and it's always been just fine. So like I've said, I try and shoot for a minimum 7-day dry. I know a lot of people shoot for 14. 10, I say, is if I get to 10, I'm happy. I'm a happy camper. If I get to 14 and I do my trick to see if they're dry and they're not dry, then I'm not a happy camper. So there's a few techniques for figuring out if they're ready. I'll give you a few that other people use, and then I'll let you know what I do. A lot of people use the snap method. If you take a small stem and you bend it, if it bends, your buds still contain too much moisture and needs more time to dry. But if it snaps, the theory is they're ready to go and they're ready to move on to the cure process. Quick note, during this process of drying, you might notice a change in the smell of your buds, but this is normal. As that chlorophyll breaks down, that like grassy smell will dissipate. So I know, I know we always get freaked out by that, but don't worry about it in that first week of drying. The true aroma of your cannabis will come through, I promise. Interestingly enough, at least I thought it was when I got going, it's the curing process where we're pulling out a lot of the good stuff. You know what I mean? It's not during the drying process, it's the curing process, okay? Now, for my method, I have a couple of GoV, the brand GoV hygrometers. They're able to connect to your phone via Bluetooth, okay? What I do is I take, a stick out of the dry room with buds on it, maybe 5 inches long, and I put it in a small glass jar, and then I put in that hygrometer, not touching any of the walls, not touching the bud. I have it hanging from the top off of a little line, so it's hanging freely in the air, not touching anything. And then I shut it, and I leave the jar for like an hour. And if my If my RH gets to a point of where it's acceptable to then move on to either jars or grove bags, then I move it. But if the RH is still coming up over that 65%, I'm putting it back in the dry room. Okay. The humidity levels that they say you should aim for when you're first starting to cure is between 55 and 65. And I've heard that like between 60 and 65 is good if you're doing the jar method, and between 55 and 60 is good if you're doing the grove bag method. And what are the differences of these two? The jar method was something, it was the standard for a long time, okay? We're putting in the buds once they're done drying, once they're measuring between 55 and 65% RH, doing my jar with hygrometer method. We're going to put the plant in the jars, and we're going to have to burp those jars daily, okay? And burping involves like opening the jars for a few minutes each day to release any excess moisture and allow fresh air to enter. So you have to do this to prevent mold, and then it'll also give you a more even cure. And then you can also use this time to inspect your buds for any signs of mold or excess moisture. And if you notice any issues, leave the jars open for a bit longer, or spread the bud out on a clean surface to dry further before sealing them back up. For the first week of curing, you want to burp the jars daily. And after the first week, you can reduce the frequency of burping once every few days. By the second or third week, you should be well on the way to being properly cured. Some growers do like to cure their buds for the full 4 to 8 weeks or even longer to achieve the best possible flavor and potency. So basically, the longer you cure, the smoother the smoke and the richer the flavor. All right. If you live in a particularly dry or humid climate, again, we're going to have to really pay attention to that RH in our jars. Consider like a Boveda or Integra Boost humidity pack, which are supposed to help maintain a consistent humidity level inside your jars. And then also during the curing process, you're going to notice that that's when your bud gets stronger smelling, but in a good way. More complex, the terpenes are coming into their own, and it's a sign that your cure is going well. So take the time to smell that and learn where you are in the process for future harvests. And then once your buds have cured doing this method to your satisfaction, they're ready to be stored long term. Keep them in a cool, dark place, and they should maintain their potency and flavor for months, if not longer. You know, it really can improve with age, like a fine wine, if it's stored properly. Now, what I do for curing is different than this. There's something called grove bags you can get, where they are supposed to keep your RH between 58 and 62 when you put your buds in there. So I'm doing my jar method with a hygrometer and then some of the buds from the dry room in the jar to see if I'm ready for the cure process. Like I said earlier, with grove bags, I'm aiming for somewhere between that 55 and 60 RH. Closer to 60, I like 58, 59 for me personally. And once I see that in my tester jar, everything goes into grove bags. Now, you will be tempted to get some big ass grove bags that can fit like a pound to make it easier to transfer from your trim table into bags. I would highly encourage you to stick with 1 ounce bags, even though they're more work and a little more money altogether. Point being is I have had mold. Not very often, but every once in a while. and that mold gets contained to a 1 ounce bag rather than the 1 pound bag. Big difference. What I do is I put a couple of hygrometers in a couple of my 1 ounce bags after my harvest has been moved from my dry room into my grove bags. And I make sure that that number is indeed between 58 and 62 RH, as it should be when in those grove bags. Oftentimes they're not exactly on, so I might have to move it over toward my dehumidifier. Even though it's shut, it does make a difference, and leave it there for a few days while I see that the RH is between 58 and 62. And then eventually I can move it into a normal room and it'll just stay there with the technology in the grow bag. If we're too dry, we can add things like Boveda, humidity packs, or even like if you have other plants going, you can put like a fan leaf in your bag, and that should help rejuvenate and get your RH back up in those buds. So that's kind of a cool trick. Why I choose grove bags is I don't have to burp them. Once I have the RH dialed in, I leave them, and I can leave them for a year. And they just get better with time. So it's just easier, a little more expensive, but easier. All right, let's move on to some listener questions that have to do with this process. Steven, what should I do? All right. Question is, what should I do if I notice mold on my buds during the drying process? So that's a great question. We're probably all going to see that at one point. We have to address it quickly. We don't want that stuff spreading. If you spot mold on your buds during the drying process, get that out of there fast, because mold can spread and ruin your whole harvest. So firstly, obviously remove the affected buds. Do not try to save them. Once mold has set in, those buds are no longer safe to consume. After removing the moldy buds, inspect the rest of your harvest closely. If you're in a high humidity environment, consider increasing air circulation in your drying room or lowering the humidity with a dehumidifier. You might also need to speed up the drying process slightly to prevent further mold growth. But be careful not to dry too quickly, as this can compromise the quality of your buds, obviously. All right. Is it okay to freeze cannabis for long-term storage after curing? Well, freezing cannabis is an option for long-term storage, but you got to do it correctly. So if you decide to freeze your buds, make sure that they're fully cured and completely dry. And then you're going to want to place them in airtight vacuum-sealed bags to prevent them from moisture and that freezer burn. But when you're ready to use your frozen cannabis, let it come to room temperature before opening the bag. This will prevent that condensation from forming on the buds, which would obviously suck. But yeah, some people swear by freezing, but a lot of people like to just keep it cold and, like in a dark corner instead. But it really comes down to personal preference and how long you plan to store your buds. Normally we will do a cannabis news segment, but I'm tired, and last few times we've talked about the news, it's pissed me off, so we're going to skip it today. And that's going to be the end of the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Marijuana Cultivation Cannabis Podcast. We've covered everything from knowing when to harvest to the ins and outs of drying and curing your cannabis for the best possible results. Remember, the time and care you put into these final steps will make all the difference in the quality of your buds. Don't forget to send your questions and feedback to contactmccpod@gmail.com. Let me know what I messed up. Follow me on Instagram, MCCPod, for updates, sneak peeks, and more. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and see how your grows are growing. Until next time, keep it green, keep it growing, and we'll talk to you soon.